What is resilience? Dan Siegel talks about the window of tolerance, the optimal zone in which an individual feels neurologically at home. According to Diane Paul Heller, this is a range of resilience, or a so-called flexible window of resilience. In this optimal zone, we feel alive and receptive, not overly stressed. We can relax, enjoy alertness, and we are not depressed or shut down. Our nervous system is doing its thing, rising sympathetically to enjoy energy and aliveness, then rhythmically shifting to the parasympathetic system to enjoy relaxation, rest, and digestive activity in response. Thanks to our sympathetic system, we become energized and activated. And then thanks to our parasympathetic system, we shift back into relaxation as if we are riding up and down on waves. This is another way of describing what it is like to be resilient. Our nervous system is working according to design. However, I want to emphasize that self-regulated and resilient people don't have a static window of tolerance. It expands in capacity, since they are regulating both by themselves and with their environment appropriately. Over time, their ability to tolerate higher heights and lower lows increases. When we leave this ideal range by rising in sympathetic arousal and exiting at the top of that window of tolerance, we encounter, for example, anxiety, panic, anger, rage, and so on. Conversely, when we descend into parasympathetic overactivation, we experience reduced vitality and reduced interest. This can lead, for example, to disconnection and dissociation and so on. When the two systems fail to work together harmoniously, imbalance occurs. The common imbalance in our Western society is that sympathetic nervous system remains dominant most of the time, while the parasympathetic rarely turns on. When this occurs, the body remains in a state of fight or flight most of the time or at all times. We work harder and harder and more, and it is perceived as if this is still not enough. We have no time. Consequently, we run even faster. Still, no relief. Not only that we might perceive that we have not enough, we may even see ourselves as if we are not enough. The stress response system never or rarely turns off. And when the body remains in a state of fight or flight all the time, degenerative processes begin and, if left unaddressed, can result, among other things, in a variety of health issues, and most importantly, in a loss of hope. At this juncture, some questions naturally arise. How is it possible to achieve and maintain balance between these two systems? How is it possible to cultivate an inner coherent state and experience ourselves and others through a flexible window of resilience? How can we practice this resilience in our consumer society, where we receive little training or no training how to let go of anything? where more is usually considered better, where clinging to and possessing are both means and ends, where accumulation is the primary measure of progress, and where personal power is both the foundational myth and supreme idol. According to Thomas Merton, in order to answer these questions, we need to learn the spiritual art of detachment, which is neither aloofness nor denial, but the purifying of attachment. In his book, No Man is an Island, Merton discusses the spiritual link between detachment and hope. Yes, hope. This connection may appear a bit counterintuitive at first, if not contradictory. Yet, as Merton explains, we do not hope for what we have. Therefore, to live in hope is to live in poverty, having nothing. Hope is proportionate to detachment. It brings our souls into the state of the most perfect detachment. In doing so, it restores all values by setting them in their right order. Hope empties our hands in order that we may work with them. It shows us that we have something to work for and teaches us how to work for it. Now, with vulnerability due to poverty on one side and hope as a strength on the other, let me continue with the essential word in this presentation, kenosis. I want to focus on vulnerability as a central aspect of kenosis. Vulnerability is the condition of kenosis. A person truly lives kenotically when one embraces this vulnerability and uses it as a source of strength. In making this argument, I claim two things. First, I claim that kenosis can provide a model for understanding a path toward human resilience in a Christian theological model. Secondly, I further claim that a kenotic anthropology provides a useful paradigm for understanding the theological challenge that attachment and suffering present. In Christian theology, kenosis is the self-emptying of Christ's own will and becoming entirely receptive to God's divine will. Christ's kenosis reveals to us something about the nature of God that has taken root, and kenotic discourse has expanded to discuss the Trinity as kenotic. Expanding kenosis to have a Trinitarian as well as a Christological meaning occurs in two ways. First, by stressing the Trinitarian aspect of the passion and death of Jesus, thus bringing all divine persons into the paramount kenotic moment. And secondly, by allowing kenosis to encompass more events than the life of Christ incarnate. These two ways are certainly not mutually exclusive. The kenosis of the incarnation then reflects not only the essence of the divine, but also the character of salvation history. As John Macquarie claims, creation too is kenosis. On this note, we look at another facet of the term kenosis, the anthropological one. In so doing, we focus on the human aspect of Christ's kenosis rather than divine self-emptying. Christ's kenosis can be seen as a model for our own mode of being, such as practicing true resilience. The anthropological sense of kenosis has had diverse interpretations. Kenosis is more than an isolated event. The Franciscan Kevin Cronin identifies kenosis with becoming Christ-like and therefore with ministry. Service then represents one incarnation of kenosis, namely kenosis on the other's self-axis. Kenosis involves emptying or decentering the self in order to become more available to the other. Jeffrey Coyce makes a similar move. He uses kenosis to describe a kind of existential orientation, one that he describes as the risk of accepting one's calling, even though it is formless and requires us to give it a form. A significant movement in kenotic discourse has taken place within spiritual theology. Human spiritual activity, such as prayer, is kenotic and makes space for God. In this context, Sarah Coakley proposes that we understand kenosis as vulnerability. This sort of vulnerability, that is, the paradoxes of losing one's life in order to save it, translates Christologically into a renewed appreciation for Christ's refusal of worldly power and for his cross and resurrection. This is a sort of vulnerability that serves as a model for Christian behavior. Coakley attempts to clarify her position to describe a kind of vulnerability that will not justify any kind of abuse. While an undiscriminating adulation of vulnerability might appear to condone or even invite such evils as physical and sexual abuse, Coakley suggests a particular kind of vulnerability that is akin to spiritual kenosis. The vulnerability that one experiences in prayer. In prayer, the person who prays withdraws and makes space for God, but not in such a way that causes him or her to efface themselves. Rather, it is a way that allows God to transform them. Thus, such vulnerability actually constitutes a non-coercive, non-violent sort of power. Developing her notion of spiritual vulnerability, Coakley clearly indicates that people may be understood as kenotic, at least in terms of their spirituality. To draw some conclusions, in accordance with Cronin and Croyce, I present kenosis as more than an act or a decision, a single decision. It is rather a life orientation. It is the same for resilience, which finds its origin in kenosis. Resilience is more than just applying a specific relaxing technique or making a decision to decrease one's stress level. Resilience is a life orientation. Spiritual exercises such as contemplative prayer and intrapersonal ethical ones, such as forgiveness, may serve as manifestations of kenosis, concrete instances in which we choose to live kenotically, but they do not make the human person fundamentally kenotic. When kenosis is applied anthropologically, kenosis refers to the existential orientation in which a person chooses not to grasp after worldly power, acclaim, or wealth. It is an acknowledgement of the fundamental human situation of vulnerability. However, as all people are vulnerable, vulnerability in itself does not constitute kenosis. Kenosis lies in the person's response to his or her vulnerability, acceptance of which is a condition for resilience. Those who avoid their vulnerability do not embrace their kenotic aspect. Nevertheless, those who lean into their vulnerability choose kenosis. When we embrace our vulnerability and allow it to be the place from which we form relationships, think critically, live courageously, harmoniously, and with hope, we are living kenotically. We show true resilience when our nervous system is challenged and we feel threatened. In such situations, a kenotic disposition actually affirms and strengthens us. Thank you.